alright. Baby, that's all. All that I wanna do. Hey, well, that's alright. It's alright. Baby, that's all. Oh, that's all. That's alright. Oh, that's alright.
My friends, it's good to be back. Ryan Jesperson here with you on this Monday morning, March 29th. After a week away from studio, it's good to have you all back with us this morning for another edition of Real Talk, hanging out with our technical producer, Samuel G. Brooks,
Hey, good morning.
because we absolutely believe that birthdays can be a week-long celebration. Technically, Sam, you remain the birthday boy. On the record, a belated happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And
How was your week
I
away?
appreciated the virtual shout out you gave me when I was on the day. My week away was good. It was I'd sort of famously told everybody I was going to be doing drywalling before that, and I've actually accomplished everything but drywalling.
That's okay.
You live in an old house. You dig into a wall and you find the bottom step of your stairs is rotted out, so you have to fix that, and then you have to move some plumbing out of the way, and then you have to move some wiring around. And I mean, that was my whole week basically.
Okay, so it's one of those weeks where you have, I mean, it sounds to me like ample opportunity to relax, and you took none of that opportunity to
I took
relax.
yesterday to relax.
Yesterday, well,
Yes.
that's good. A day of rest.
It was Sunday. On the seventh day, he rested.
That's good. Well, we're you see the pastor of Grace Life Church back at it yesterday, out of jail and back at it. Speaking of,
With the most slap on the wrist you could possibly give him.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know how real talkers are going to feel about that. That's a story that we've been keeping an eye on here for obvious reasons. It's a story of, I think, national prominence as congregants refuse to respect public health orders at this church west of Edmonton, absolutely packing it to capacity each and every Sunday. Their pastor had been sitting in jail for a number of weeks because he refused to comply with the terms of his release, which would have been that he was not going to bring hundreds and hundreds of people together to gather again, which he refused to do. He said, I'm not going to make a promise there. Well, he's out, and he's back at it, and the RCMP are back outside the church. Alberta Health Services saying they're not letting us in. They're saying we're working together. We're trying to set a statement from Alberta Health Services yesterday. AHS has extended an offer to meet virtually with representatives from the church to discuss the surge in COVID cases and answer any questions about the current restrictions. They have no questions about the current restrictions. They have no quest. There's no communication breakdown. There's no confusion. There's no obfuscation. There's no flying through the clouds, uncertain. Our mistake. We thought that when you said that our capacity was capped at 92 people, which would be 15% of fire code, we misunderstood that. And so that's why we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people here every single week. There's no confusion. And now people are rightfully looking around saying, well, if they don't have to follow the rules, and if there's no consequences for blatantly, I mean, we're not talking like, someone might have a few people over to their house and you got to keep it down in case the neighbors hear and call the cops. The cops are parked outside the church. This is the most blatant, wanton disregard for public health measures. Probably, it's among those, the most blatant disregard for public health measures across the country. So people now are going to sit here and you sort of wonder what that rub-off effect is. We'll be talking this week. I mean, we've got a lot of news to catch up on. I should note that the federal environment minister is going to join us in probably 3 minutes' time. We'll talk about as they will describe it, the federal government's win at the Supreme Court with regards to the carbon tax. If you're talking to any members or elected representatives from provincial governments in Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta today, they will describe it as the loss at the Supreme Court around the carbon tax. We got to talk about the $60 million fine handed to Tech Resources. We got to talk about the fact that Ever Given is free in the Suez Canal. They believe that goods will be moving again today, Sam. This is a huge deal.
Did you keep tabs on the website? Is the ship still stuck.com?
was it just updates? Yes.
Yes, yeah. It literally
Yes.
just said at the top, yes or no, and here's some books you should read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is moving today, which is good news for everybody. It was one of those stories where it was, I mean, deadly serious for people with regards to how it halts an economy. I mean, people, you know, I mean, the impact that it has on global trade is unbelievable. To try to stop that thing, but you saw these guys running these backhoes, these tiny little backhoes. Well, they looked tiny. This is like the biggest container ship in the world.
Yeah, honestly, it looked like when I would have like, I don't know, like a plastic ship in the sandbox, and then I'd bring the tiny little digger in beside it, that kind of thing. Like, it actually looked very sandbox-esque,
And
the
actually,
way that it was going.
And if you're operating that backhoe, you're probably actually feeling like you've got a pretty cool gig. You've also probably got a bit of a sense that the world is watching and cheering you on and hoping that you can get the job done as soon as humanly possible. We'll be curious to see what those that are tuning in live this morning, you're either listening to us stream through the Mixlr audio app or you're watching us live on YouTube this morning. We'll be curious to know what you have to say on the news of the day. And, of course, we'll get into some of your emails. Many of you took the opportunity to write into the show while we were off, which was great. It was great to have the hashtag RealTalkRJ continuing to see some action on Twitter. And, of course, we're never totally out of it, so we were paying attention to what was arriving in our inbox. Kim took a minute to write into us just a couple of days ago on Saturday to talk at ryanjesperson.com. Kim said, you know, I'm interested in the week to come in hearing some solutions, some proposed solutions to some of the issues plaguing Alberta and Canada. What would our medical experts recommend in regards to decreasing COVID-19 numbers, especially as the amount of variant cases increase? Was opening bars really such a smart move? Asks Kim. Kim, Thursday at 9. We've got a panel coming up. It's going to be a good one. She wonders what can be done about Jason Kenney's leadership folly. You know, I mean, is there hope that he could be influenced positively? How does one play to his ego in order to convince him to do what's right for Albertans? Interesting question from Kim. She says, now, Alberta's premier will obviously not accept Rachel Notley's carbon tax plan. So what would be the best made in Alberta solution and why? Where did former Premier Notley's plan fall short? How could it be improved by the Conservatives for the best interests of Albertans? I love the question. We're going to ask that. Kim, will ask your question specifically to Dr. Andrew Leach. He'll clarify that he's not a lawyer, but he's been going through the process, but he is an economist, and he's a professor at the Alberta School of Business. He'll join us in about a half an hour's time. He's got Dr. Leach is Sam, I don't know if you saw this on Twitter. Dr. Leach is in an interesting position because he is, and we'll get him to clarify, we'll get him to give us all the details when he joins us in about a half hour, but he's essentially one of the, if not the, architect of Rachel Notley's climate plan.
Yeah.
He was one of the, let's call him the senior architects of the climate plan. He also supported or supports the Alberta government joining Saskatchewan and Ontario in suing the feds, running it all the way up to the Supreme Court. The look on your face, if we take the Uncle Sam cam,
I'm a little perplexed by that.
Can you
See,
just,
okay, that's
can you
the part that I
replay
didn't
the
know.
look on the face?
All right, so you just
I
you
said so he supports the court challenge. And Sam gave the
that's about the look that I get. Yeah.
So we're going to find out why. And I'm going to be, Dr. Leach is smarter than me, so we'll ask him to dumb it down for us and help us understand how the architect of Notley's plan thinks that Kenney was right to run it up to the Supreme Court. That's coming up in about a half an hour. Kim goes on to say, that's it for now. As long as we can solve the pandemic and Alberta's leadership and the carbon tax plan, that'll be it for this week, says Kim, with a smile on her face. She says, thanks for taking the time off. It gave me a chance to catch up on past episodes. Please take vacation again, but not too often. That from Kim. Kim, we promise. And thank you for being in touch. This show and all of our shows are proudly presented by our title sponsor, the team at Bitcoin Well. They're working with individuals that are trying to figure out their game plan, how they're going to approach crypto, if at all, if it's a good fit for them. But they also work with businesses Whether it's a small business or a larger one, if financial sovereignty is your end goal, I mean, if ultimately that's why you're working so hard, have you considered how crypto might fit into that? The team at Bitcoin Well is ready to talk to you anytime and meet you wherever you're at with regards to your understanding of where this is all going. You can find them right at the top of the page, the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
So, of course, the Supreme Court of Canada ruling that a national price on pollution, a federal carbon tax, does not equal overreach when it comes to areas of provincial jurisdiction like taxation. I have no doubt that our first guest this morning will perceive the Supreme Court's ruling as a win. He is Canada's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson. Minister, thanks for making time for us and welcome to Real Talk.
Thank you.
That probably feels like a win, obviously, for the federal government here.
Well, I don't know about a win. I mean, I think certainly we are pleased that the Supreme Court has decided on the jurisdictional issue so that hopefully we can move past the legal wrangling and focus on what I think all Canadians want us to focus on, which is how do we address climate change, which is real, in a manner that will be responsive and thoughtful to build regional economies that are strong and create jobs.
So, people that would argue, including lawyers for Alberta and Saskatchewan, Ontario, that this is overreach by the feds, that this is treading on these provinces' constitutional right to determine their own taxation or impose their own taxation in areas like this. I mean, what's the layperson's argument against that?
Well, I just fundamentally don't accept that. I mean, this is a court decision based on the Peace, Order, and Good Government Clause, which has been part of the Constitution since 1867. It is based on the doctrine of national concern, which is some issues actually have national dimensions and therefore are properly the jurisdiction of the federal government. That's not new. And it's written very narrowly to focus on this specific issue. And I mean, come on. I mean, reasonable people will understand that if climate change, which is something that certainly carbon emissions know no borders, if this is not something of national concern, what is?
Do you see this as, I might be getting ahead of myself in our conversation, but do you see this as the end of the fight between the provinces and the feds over this? Or do you see this as the end of the first fight and the beginning of a bigger one? Because I know that, the federal government, we should probably go to this first, but I know this empowers you to bolster Canada's commitment, to exceed, as you've said in interviews, Canada's commitment to the Paris Accord. Do you see this as the end of the fight with the provinces, or are you bracing for just the next level?
Well, I certainly hope this is the end of the fight. I mean, Canada works best when the federal and provincial governments find ways to collaborate on areas where we have common interests. And that is certainly what I want to do. I honestly think that the difference here is a bit overblown. I mean, take Alberta. Alberta was a trailblazer in terms of carbon pricing. It was one of the first provinces that put a carbon price on industrial emitters. And there are many other areas in the climate plan where we have been and will be actively collaborating with Alberta and Saskatchewan on things like carbon capture and storage and hydrogen development, biofuels, methane-related technologies, advanced materials for additional uses of bitumen in the future. Renewable energy, Alberta is projected to be the fastest growing jurisdiction in terms of renewable energy. We want to work on all of those things to ensure that we're building strong regional economies, but we also want to ensure that we are reducing carbon emissions in the most effective way possible. And look, 99 out of 100 economists will tell you the pricing on pollution is the most efficient way to reduce carbon emissions in a manner that actually incents innovation. That's what we want to do. We want to create jobs. We want to reduce emissions.
So, Minister, I would imagine you're probably going to get different justifications for a legal fight or different arguments out of you would in urban Ontario than you may from rural Alberta, to state the obvious. A lot of, I think, the sort of disgruntled approach to carbon pricing comes from, as far as I can tell, in a lot of cases, people that are working in ag, farmers, rural residents, people in I mean, I don't have to tell you about the climate here, and people talk about, oftentimes politicians will invoke, people heating their homes, right? Or people taking their kids to school. That's sort of everyday thing that's not a choice for somebody. Somebody doesn't choose whether or not they heat their home. You get what I'm getting at. I've got relatives that talk about, the price of drying grain using natural gas. Now it's just astronomical under this carbon tax, and the government doesn't seem to be listening there. Can the federal government do a better job of understanding some of the regional or industry-specific pushback against this federal carbon tax? And are you open to tweaking it to as either a show of good faith or getting more Canadians on board with the theory behind it or how it's applied?
Well, I think certainly there probably are ways in which we need to communicate more effectively. I don't discount that at all, and there probably are areas that it can be tweaked to ensure that we're addressing some of the particular concerns. Let me start with consumers. So one of the things that I think sometimes politicians who are opposed to the price on pollution neglect to say is that the average family gets more money back than they pay in the price. So the rebates actually, for the majority of families in Alberta, get more money back than they pay. The second issue is, the rural areas sometimes have higher costs. I'm very sensitive to that. I grew up in Saskatchewan. I used to work for the province of Saskatchewan, very similar in terms of the topography. There is an incremental amount of money, a 10% boost that actually goes to rural people in terms of the rebates to try to accommodate that. Should that number be higher? Perhaps. And that's one of the reasons why some provinces decide to put in place their own price on pollution so that they can actually customize it to their particular circumstances. In terms of some groups, the farming community in particular, I think there is some thought, and we've actually said this publicly, in terms of grain drying and on-farm use of gaseous fuels, because liquid fuels are exempt, looking at whether there should be some kind of a rebate like what we do with consumers. So there's still an incentive to try to find higher, to use higher efficiency grain dryers, for example, or to think about heating your property by using heat pumps instead of natural gas. But you get a rebate such that the affordability issue is less than what it has been. So yes, absolutely, we're listening, and we probably also need to communicate. But I would also tell you that some politicians, like Aaron O'Toole, telling you that somehow this is a price on poor people, they're just telling you something that's just not true.
When you say just not true, you're pointing back to the rebates. Is that how you would dismiss that?
The rebates, the Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report on this, and what it showed is between 60 and 80% of Canadian families get more money back than they pay. And it works in reverse to income. So the folks that actually earn less than $100,000 a year typically are better off. The only people that actually pay a little bit more than what they get back in the rebate are people who have very, very large homes, drive very, very inefficient cars, et cetera.
Can I just to be candid for a second, that's one of the things that I find weird as a civilian. I'm not a politician. I'm not an economist. I don't read legislation. But when I look at and government officials like yourselves that'll say, hey, listen, most people get back more than what they pay in. And then I sit there and the civilian in me goes, well, then what the hell is the point? Like my whole understanding of this whole thing is that it's supposed to be funding green initiatives and transit and sort of like, subsidies for people that can install solar into their, whatever the case may be. There's 100 different applications. To sort of spin it as, well, most people get back more than they pay in. I go, well, it kind of, to me, it almost validates the assertion that it's a wealth redistribution tax. And typically people will say, well, that's the tinfoil hat response to this. But when the carbon tax is justified in such a way that people make money off it, that actually turns me off, to be honest.
So fair enough. And I would tell you there are some provinces that use some of the proceeds from the way in which they price to invest in green initiatives and those kinds of things. And certainly the industrial emitters, that's exactly how it works. But for the average Canadian, this is not about raising revenue for the government. This is actually about ensuring that we are creating a price signal. So when the price of the gasoline that you're going to fuel your car up with goes up, what does it cause you to do? It causes you to think about, well, maybe the next time I actually buy a car, I should buy one that actually gets better gas mileage. Or maybe I should, if I live in an urban area, take the bus more often. The same thing is true with your house. Should I put better insulation in the house to reduce the heating bill for natural gas? by returning the money in a rebate, you don't defeat the price signal. You don't defeat the incentive to be more efficient in terms of your use of carbon emitting fuels. But what you do is you ensure that it can be affordable for people, that it actually doesn't hit them in the pocketbook, especially lower income people. And that's the point.
Minister, can you give us a sense of what conversation with industry looks like here? I would specifically when we talk oil and gas, I would imagine that, I mean, again, I'm not a CEO, but I would imagine that at least the Supreme Court decision provides some form of certainty, or at least, executives can understand what the landscape looks like right now as they try to decide where assets will be allocated and what will be written down and what won't be, et cetera. We're also, of course, paying varying degrees of attention to Line 5 right now, and some sort of approaching that with some trepidation. And you wonder if news like this may resonate in a positive way. I mean, are you having these conversations with industry leaders?
Well, we're absolutely. I mean, we're talking to industry leaders all the time. And I would tell you that industry leaders in Alberta in particular, and in the energy sector in particular, are far ahead of their government on this. Most of the large oil and gas companies in Calgary have already committed to net zero by 2050. They have aggressive emissions reduction plans between now and 2030. And they recognize that they actually need to work to transform their business, to be essentially keeping up with where the world is going, to have access to capital on a go-forward basis. When capital is now being allocated, one of the bases of it is your willingness and ability to reduce carbon emissions. So, we have very, very thoughtful and productive conversations with the energy industry. And in fact, many in the energy industry are certainly very much in favor of a price on pollution. Some of these companies have been using an internal price on pollution far longer than there's been an explicit price on pollution in the country. So absolutely, it's a very progressive industry in this country.
So when we talk about regional strategies for job creation or for economic stimulus, we do what we might describe as a national talk show. But the fact of the matter is we have a ton of people the majority of people tune in from Western Canada. So what's the message specifically to those, let's say, on the prairies in Alberta and Saskatchewan, two of the three provinces that challenged this, that ran this up to Canada's highest court, with regards to what the federal government is looking at for regional strategies for job creation and economic stimulus?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And that is something that I worked on pretty hard in developing the new climate plan for Canada that we put out in December. I do think that you have to have regional strategies, economic strategies in a country like this. The interests and the needs of Atlantic Canada are quite different from the prairies, and the needs and aspirations of Quebec are quite different from British Columbia. The prairies, actually, I would tell you, have enormous opportunity going forward to a much lower carbon universe. There's certainly a lot of activity in Alberta right now around hydrogen, certainly in the Heartland area. There's a lot of excitement about hydrogen as both an energy carrier for domestic use, but also as an export product. Biofuels, which will have enormous upside for the agriculture community. Carbon capture and sequestration, where Canada is a leader in that and could end up exporting that technology around the world, but it will also help us to reduce carbon emissions. Even the methane reduction technologies that are being developed to actually help us reduce methane emissions have an opportunity to be an export product. Advanced materials, as I said before, in terms of additional uses of the oil resource in Alberta, and a range of other things. So, those are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having going forward. I would actually tell you, I talked to Jason Nixon quite a lot, and by and large on issues like this, we have no disagreement. And in fact, we are trying to find pathways to work together on a whole bunch of these things. So again, we have a difference on the consumer price on pollution. I wouldn't say on the price on pollution, because as I said before, Alberta was a trailblazer in terms of pricing emissions from industrial emitters in that province. But we have all kinds of things on which we do agree, and I think we can work on to ensure that we're developing the economy of the future on the prairies, in British Columbia, in Ontario, in Quebec, and elsewhere.
Of course, Jason Nixon, Alberta's Minister of Environment and Parks. Have you talked to Minister Nixon about the provincial government's approach to coal mining? I mean, this is such a powder keg kind of a story. But I don't have to tell you what's happened. Essentially, rolling back the coal policy, re-implementing the coal policy, reconsidering some of the leases. We get a ton of letters. When we announced that you were going to be on the show today, we got a ton of emails from people saying, please ask the federal minister why there haven't been stop work orders issued for exploration activity that's happening right now in areas where where civilians or engaged citizens allege that it should not be occurring right now. This is the type of issue that I don't think really was an issue for many Albertans. At least it wasn't on their radar until country music stars and talk hosts started talking about it. Then, of course, we see here that Teck Resources fined $60 million for releasing chemicals, including selenium, into the water back in 2012. It took about 8 or 9 years to get that figured out in court. I mean, you talk about coal in Alberta right now. I'll tell you, Minister, if there was a word cloud about the emails we get from our listeners, coal would be right there, huge, right in the middle. That's got to be on your radar. Have you talked to Minister Nixon about that?
Well, I haven't talked to him in the last little while about it, but certainly the issue has come up in conversations. I mean, this issue around the eastern slopes, I do understand how controversial that has been in Alberta. Land use decisions in terms of opening it up for development and then deciding to not open it up are solely the purview of the provincial government. That would be federal overreach for the federal government to start to play a role in land use decisions. I think the one thing that I have said is this is an area where ecosystems tend to be still pretty much intact. We are very much focused as a federal government on trying to actually ensure that we're protecting intact ecosystems as part of trying to stem the decline in biodiversity in this country. And so, when the decision was made to open it up, I think, I saw that as something that created some real challenges from a biodiversity perspective. In terms of the federal role in coal mining, in the mining of metallurgical coal in particular, the federal government gets involved if there is a decision to move forward with a particular mine. As long as it's of a certain size, then the federal government can run its own environmental assessment along with the provincial one. But until that point, there's really no federal role. So I understand the concern, and certainly issues around selenium are very top of mind. We are actually developing regulations about what can be discharged and what can't with respect to selenium from existing and future coal mines right now. It is a real issue. It is something that we need to be sensitive to, and there will have to be more done with respect to selenium going forward for all coal mines.
So people will wonder, to bring this conversation full circle, what this means right now. The carbon levy, the federal carbon tax right now, I feel stupid, I don't remember. Is it $30 a ton right now? I think it's 30, right? Going to 40?
Well, in a few days it'll be 40. So, yeah.
So, let's call it 40 then. To give people a sense, comparatively, by 2030, so 9 years from now, the federal government has it at 170. So it's 400% essentially of where it's at right now. What does that mean for consumers with regards? I mean, the federal government to a certain degree is expecting some rapid action, right? Relatively speaking, on an individual level from people. I mean, if people put it this way, frankly, if people are bitching about it now, when it's 4 times what it's about to be, I would imagine the voices will be louder and louder unless something dramatic changes. What do the next 9 years look like, do you think, most especially following this court decision?
Well, the price will go up, but so will the rebate. And so from a net perspective, again, the majority of Albertan families and the majority of Canadian families where the federal system applies will actually be better off. They won't be worse off, but they will have a strong incentive to make their homes more energy efficient, to think about transportation and how they make the transportation they use more energy efficient. Certainly, the industrial price will push forward the deployment of things like carbon capture and storage. It will push forward the use of alternative fuels like hydrogen and biofuels, which will be good for the economy of Alberta. And so, I think that what we will start to see is, Canada's emissions levels going down for the first time in many, many years. And starting to see the development of economies that actually are based on a low carbon future that we are going to be competing in with our American friends and with countries around the world.
Let me ask this. Minister, we'll make this last question. I know you've got a jet, so do we. Just got this in from Keith, who's listening. Keith is the chef and owner of Roy's Place Restaurant. Lives in the riding of Livingstone McLeod. He was featured in You Gotta Eat Here, so this guy knows what he's talking about on the restaurant side. Apparently, he's got a hell of a cinnamon bun that he does there at Roy's Place. He says, we understand. So he's a chef and he's an entrepreneur. He says, we understand that change is necessary. He says, small businesses like my restaurant depend heavily on natural gas, and costs are challenging. He says, I might have a gross profit of 5 to 7%. He says, 1% cost increase to me is a 20% loss of profit. He says, we want to work to improve, but gas cooking, for example, on an industrial level, is just we can't make a move in that department right now. He says, building heating and air rotation is in much higher need in businesses like mine. Then you add in the deficit of COVID, and it creates a mental health twitch just listening to this conversation. I mean, that's one guy's story, that's one guy's business, but how does that resonate with you as the federal minister?
Well, I think those are very legitimate questions and concerns to raise. And what I would say is a couple things. I mean, the first is the reality of climate change is the reality of climate change. Like, that's not going away. And so the need to address it is with us today and will continue to be with us tomorrow. But I would also say that the way in which we address it has to be done thoughtfully. We do need to move away from carbon-based fuels or the combustion of carbon-based fuels, and we need to become more energy efficient as we actually move forward. Government needs to partner, to be a partner with small and medium-sized enterprises to how those get done. And certainly we are looking at bringing forward ideas about how we can work with small and medium-sized enterprises to help with that, to help reduce the exposure to the price on pollution by enhancing energy efficiency, by looking at new technologies. And certainly, I would simply say that is exactly the conversation that we need to engage with folks like him.
Minister, we appreciate your time today. The Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thanks for swinging by Real Talk.
Great. Thank you.
You bet. Real Talkers, we're keeping an eye on our live chat right now. What you have to say on this, you can, of course, hit us up on the hashtag RealTalkRJ on Twitter. That's where Chef got us there. Appreciate him chiming in. The specifics mean something to me. Hey, Sam, when somebody writes in and says, here's specifically, right? I remember when my cousin Corey shared with me, he scanned or he took a screenshot of his natural gas bill from the farm. This was about a year or two ago, and he sent it to me, and he said, here's some real dollars, here's some real numbers so you can process this. I think for people it makes sense to know how much does it, when the carbon tax goes up, what does that mean for you with regards to how many more cents or how many more dollars per tank of gas, as an example, or per month on your home heating bill. That's how people can process it.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that, I'm feeling a little bit of a disconnect on this situation, and I think part of it is I want to start off by saying that writ large, based on economic data, based on lots of research, based on lots of interviews, and quite frankly, based on the way that the world is shifting, carbon pricing is probably one of the most effective tools we have to reduce emissions.
Sure,
I'm quite in favor of some sort of a robust carbon pricing structure. And yes, that should extend to consumers. It should affect the price of gas. However, I have a problem when governments say, oh, don't worry, you're going to get it back in a rebate. Because rebates assume you have money up front. When you are somebody that is told you have to pay this cost up front, but you'll get it back with your taxes later, if you're like you or me and you live comfortably in a house with a pretty good income, that's something that you can absorb and ride it out until the tax check comes back. If you are paycheck to paycheck and you're driving an old, inefficient car because you can't afford anything newer, and you live in an area of the cities that's poorly serviced by transit, and you don't have a lot of options, and you have to pay this hits your cash flow on a regular basis, you don't have the same capacity to absorb this wait until the tax refund comes type of scenario.
Yeah, fair point.
So to me, I really think we need a robust carbon pricing structure, but it's a cop-out to say you're going to get it back on rebates because that doesn't help anybody in the now.
Yeah, I mean, we could really get in the weeds on this, on what that means, but big sort of idea-wise, big picture-wise, it's a good point. Karen says, not true, Ryan, what you said. Many Albertans had coal on their radar long before Corb Lund and everybody else got involved. They just amplified our voices. Totally true, Karen, 100%. And we're grateful and we're lucky to have people like ranchers and producers and rural Albertans, people living near the eastern slopes of the Rockies, people that pay keen attention to environmental stories and keep keen eye on the government, more important now than ever, in my opinion. Totally agree with you, Karen. At the same point, though, I don't think you can argue that the majority of Albertans even would have suspected. I mean, this is one of the things that politicians can do, and it's not just Alberta's provincial government, although the Alberta's provincial government is really good at it. Is creating a lot of noise and a lot of action, and you lose track because you're only human and you can't keep pace, and there are fewer and fewer journalists, and I'm going to go on a soapbox now and start ranting and rambling, and more of my friends lost their broadcasting jobs in the last 2 weeks, and the industry's just, more and more people want to, anyway, I'm not going to get off on that tangent, but there's not as many people there's not as many ledge watchers. And I just think that it's fair to say that the majority of Albertans, the majority of Canadians were surprised to learn that Alberta was well down the road of green lighting open pit coal mining on the eastern slopes of the Rockies. I don't think the majority of people were aware of that. That's not to say that some engaged citizens haven't been fighting this for a long time. And I have mad respect for those people, and I'm grateful that they did and that they are and that they continue to. You can let us know what you think about, what you heard. Larry says it is time for all Canadians to understand that carbon reduction must happen and polluters must pay. Says regional and federal carbon strategies must be put in place to encourage the economy and to encourage investment. Stephen, meantime, says all these thoughtful conversations the Trudeau government has conducted have led to increased costs for taxpayers. Mark's watching in from Utah says, passing along higher prices to the consumer only works to the level that the consumer is willing to pay. He says, I worked retail long enough to know you can't just keep raising prices all the time. Les is watching in from Southern Alberta, says that was one area where Rachel Notley had it wrong with her carbon tax. We'll ask our next guest, Dr. Andrew Leach. Les says rural Albertans were paying more. The rebate should have been based on postal codes. We'll get into that. Let's take a quick moment to remind you that the teams at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge have, bar none, the best selection of Jeep and Ram trucks in the province of Alberta, bar none. So whether you're looking to upgrade your family's ride, maybe an SUV is a nice fit for you. This new Jeep Grand Cherokee L has that third row of seating, the 7-seater Grand Cherokee, or maybe the big, nice, luxurious Grand Wagoneer later this year. Or maybe you're picking up a trailer. Maybe you're taking a look at where these COVID rates are going, and you're going, this is going to be another summer of camping. That's what our family's doing this summer. You're going to need something to haul that trailer. You'll find the best selection in the province of Ram trucks at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. Also, a big shout out to the team at Park Power. They're powering our hashtag today and every show. The Real Talk RJ. Park Power is proud to take 10% of their profits and give them back to the communities where they do business. It's just one of the reasons why we're proud to partner with them. They offer internet, natural gas, and electricity. And if you sign up today at parkpower.ca and use the promo code 2021-REALTALK, they're going to give you $70 off your first bill at parkpower.ca. Sam, let's take a quick look at what's making news today. As mentioned, Grace Life Church just west of Edmonton, the parking lot jam-packed yesterday as their pastor James Coates preached for the first time after being incarcerated last month for refusing to follow COVID-19 public health measures. Of course, the rules state that churches and places of worship have to limit attendance to 15% of their fire code capacity. Of course, that's not the case at Grace Life. Alberta Health Services says they continue to work to clear up any confusion. There is no confusion. That's what the other news anchors aren't allowed to do in their newscasts. Have you seen this story? A Chinese diplomat referring to Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as boy in a sneering social media attack. This is the new shift, they're calling it, toward confrontational diplomacy from Beijing, particularly against countries that China views as weaker. Li Yang, who's China's consul general to Rio de Janeiro, in a tweet this week, I don't know, I'm smiling. This is just bizarro world. addresses Canada's Prime Minister, quote, "Boy, your greatest achievement is to have ruined the friendly relations between China and Canada and have turned Canada into a running dog of the Americans." Running dog, a phrase typically associated with Maoist China. It's an insult that invokes a dog running after a master for scraps. Says commentary in the Globe and Mail. Its use against a foreign leader by a diplomat is unusual, you might say. And as mentioned, the Ever Given, one of the largest water vessels ever built in human history, has been freed and is now on the move. According to the authority chairman of Egypt's Suez Canal, the ship partially shifted on late Sunday night here, early Monday morning over there, started moving away from the western bank after blocking the Suez Canal for 6 days. Just a remarkable story. It's one of those stories that's kind of funny unless you're involved or affected in any way, shape, or form, and then it's not funny at all. But the Ever Given is free. All right, let's broaden our conversation around this Supreme Court decision. We haven't even really talked about the fact that Conservative Party of Canada members voted against a movement to more formally recognize climate change as an existential threat. Aaron O'Toole, the leader, saying the party's got to change if we're going to win. And in follow-up, he's been talking to reporters over the weekend, essentially when asked about the party's grassroots, saying no to a more definitive position on climate change. Aaron O'Toole telling a press conference yesterday, quote, "I'm the leader, I'm in charge." So Aaron O'Toole showing, his version of leadership on that file. And Real Talkers, I'm curious to know how you feel about this. Dr. Andrew Leach, a good friend of this show, is an associate professor at the Alberta School of Business. He's just wrapped up studies at the U of A's Faculty of Law, though he's going to tell me, because what is it? It's a technicality. You've not been called to the bar? Is that why I'm not calling you a lawyer?
Exactly. I didn't do a JD or a prequel to practicing law, just a master's in constitutional law.
Okay, but you got it. And two of your papers, here's a big deal. One of them with Eric Adams at the U of A, and the other with Martin Olshinsky, who's been on Real Talk with you before, and his colleague Nigel Banks, cited by the Supreme Court in their decision, which, as I understand it, is a pretty big deal. Dr. Andrew Leach, welcome to Real Talk. Welcome back. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to ask you, my only assignment to you today is dumb it down, because there's no doubt we can both agree that, you're smarter than me and you can run circles around me on this stuff, but let's talk in layperson's language. You are one of the key architects of Rachel Notley's and the NDP government's climate strategy, and you support Premier Jason Kenney fighting the feds with this carbon tax challenge up to the Supreme Court. And some people might think that those two can't align, but with you, they obviously do. So help us understand.
Sure. I think there's a difference between supporting Premier Kenney's approach to this, which is very political, versus is this a valid question to ask? And to me, this question, and we've had this in our country since Confederation, how far can the federal government reach into the traditional areas of the provinces, and is back and forth at the Supreme Court between provinces and the federal government about different pieces of legislation. And this is the legislative challenge of our time, in a way, is how we deal with climate change as a country. And so for a province to step out and say, no, I think the federal government, in the way they've designed this or the way they've done this, has gone too far, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do think there's some things wrong with how he's, both before and after the rulings, politicized the courts and really called on the courts to advance his own political agenda. But in terms of asking the question, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Not only do you not think there's anything wrong with it, do you think it was important?
Absolutely. I think, we can stand here or sit here, or I guess we're sitting, agree that climate change is one of the existential challenges for governments right now. And the question is, which level of government and using which tools, which levels of government can deal with this problem? And Alberta, for example, has had carbon pricing since 2007. So we definitely don't want something that says this is only a federal government policy problem. This is something that provincial governments can deal with as well. And we absolutely don't want to just say, this is only the provincial government, that there's no coordinating role for the feds. But how you balance that and how you make it consistent with the way we've divided powers between our two levels of governments over time is an important question for us.
What do you read into the 6-3 decision? Put that into perspective for us. I'm not sure. Maybe, I don't know if people were expecting a unanimous decision, but what do you read into, and more particularly, the rulings? I know you've dug into it. 6-3, what do you make of it?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of people kind of scorekeeping on this to say, well, look, that wasn't even close. It was 6-3. And I think we're not privy to the discussions of the justices behind the scenes and how they're thinking on this or how sort of close it was. But, if you think about it, you're only 2 justices away from the decision turning the other way. So 2 justices that have to decide that one of the reasons some of their colleagues objected to this legislation, well, you know what? Yeah, you're right. That's valid. Let's send the federal government back to the drawing board. So I don't think you want to scorekeep too much. If you look across this legislation was challenged in Ontario, in Saskatchewan, in Alberta, and then again at the Supreme Court. And at the end of the day, you end up with, through those 4 decisions, I think if my math is right in my head here, 9 of our top jurists in the country coming out and saying, no, this was too much of a reach for the federal government. And then you've got a few more than that saying, no, this is carefully adjudicated within the bounds of the federal government's reach. So it's not like this was a no-brainer or this was something that, I've seen a lot of people say, oh yeah, it's obvious that the federal government could do this. It was obvious from day one. And I just don't accept that.
You, I know that have been paying attention to past Supreme Court decisions. As a matter of fact, past cases in front of the Supreme Court and seen some pretty interesting one. What about Stephen Harper's Securities Act? There was a big swing there. And I wonder if you may find some sort of like some interesting application here.
Great question. And the court in the carbon pricing ruling relied quite a bit on the history of that, even though it was a slightly different federal power. But the governor, Stephen Harper, went forward with national securities regulation, and that went before the court in 2011. And at that point, the court actually, I think to the surprise of many observers, ruled unanimously against the federal government's ability to regulate securities in the way they'd put forward. And they essentially carved out a roadmap and said, these are the things you can do, these are the things you can't. A few years later, the government came back with new legislation that in that case was adopted unanimously by the Supreme Court or was endorsed unanimously by the Supreme Court. So these are not necessarily things that are, even though it comes out as a 9-0 decision, that doesn't necessarily mean you're far from the line. It's not the way you would look at a hockey score and say, well, if one team beat the other 9-0, there must have been a mismatch. It can be a very, very close decision and yet still fall unanimously because the particular technical aspect of the ruling captures all judges in terms of what they think is a reasonable outcome.
So what does this mean? I mean, there's obviously partisan infusion here. You've talked about the premier's politicizing of this and politicians are going to politic. I saw the hashtag Rachel was right trending after the decision. People are saying, well, Notley had an Alberta, an Alberta designed, Alberta implemented carbon tax, years ago. And are we just going to go to that? You don't necessarily think that Premier Jason Kenney is going to introduce a made in Alberta carbon tax. What do you think if you're the Premier of Alberta, or let me just ask you don't have to walk in his shoes. What do you think he's going to do?
Well, my sense is, Jason Kenney, since really even back to the Stéphane Dion era, has been a staunch opponent of carbon pricing, carbon taxes, and in particular, obviously very opposed to the one that Premier Notley imposed here in Alberta. So, and he's basically spent the last, 5 or 6 years of his, maybe more than that, trying to position himself as the strength against the weakness of Justin Trudeau. And so I can't see him now turning around and saying, okay, sure, Justin Trudeau's won. I'm going to do that thing, which I am incredibly opposed to, but I'm going to blame Justin Trudeau for making me do it. I can't see that. I see, and I'm maybe alone on my island on this, but I think you're more likely to see him let the federal government keep their price imposed and use that as a consistent way to say, look, you're paying Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. And then where he can, he'll use the revenues that come from the federal government as a result of that. And as we've seen him on other files, take full credit for it, even though it's money that's coming from the federal government, and in some case, money that's backstopped by the carbon price.
Yeah. I'm curious to see. I mean, on one hand, he wouldn't be wrong. I mean, it is Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. We just talked to Minister Wilkinson, who acknowledges that, over the next 9 years, which is either an eternity or not, depending on your perspective, it's going up by 400%. I mean, that's a big deal. At the same time, though, I think that, we get polling through our audience and our partnership with Wise Station, and we see polling from other agencies and firms across Canada, and we know that Canadians widely acknowledge, the majority of Canadians anyway, widely acknowledge across the country that climate change is a real threat and that we need to do something about it. And so I've got time to listen to a politician say, I don't think that carbon pricing is the way to go, but if that politician doesn't have an alternative plan or doesn't have a vision, then I'm not sure how much weight their words carry. And I just don't. I like to think that my fellow Albertans and my fellow Canadians are intelligent and will see through, pure partisan, politicization of an issue like this. And I don't know that it plays well as more and more people become acutely aware of the impact of climate change and the undeniability of it. I'm not sure how much longer Jason Kenney can play those cards unless he comes up with meaningful alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think those cards are still going to play well in Alberta, right? If you break down the polling data, I know there's some work from the University of Montreal at the riding level and at the provincial.
We may have had Dr. Leach freeze for a moment there. It's not the worst. Some people, their freeze face is like really unflattering. I thought that was actually, he looked very contemplative and he looked very thoughtful there with his freeze face, but that's a pretty good freeze face. Let me know, Sam, when we get him back, and we'll look forward to continuing our conversation with Dr. Andrew Leach. It gives me a chance to check in on our live chat here and say what real talkers are saying, those that are watching us live this morning. This was an interesting one from Jim. Let me hit this head on. Jim says, isn't that interesting? Ryan goes from talking about carbon pricing right into talking about Ram trucks and advertising about Ram trucks. And I love having conversations like this because I don't think that that's incongruous, and I don't think that that's a big punch between my eyes, like, oh, I was talking about carbon tax and then I talked about Ram trucks. I support action on the climate file. I have all day to talk about what you think is the best approach to it. Right now in Canada, it's carbon pricing, and we can talk to a lot of experts, including the guy that we're talking to right now, Dr. Andrew Leach, about why that's effective. That doesn't mean that I'm not proud to, we have a classic car that has a 429, a 7.2 liter 429 V8 in there. That thing, we pay more to drive that car. I love off-roading. That it's a family hobby. We burn fuel and we pay the carbon tax. I'm not going to pretend if you have people that are right now keeping, the country heated, out there working, people that are working in ag, people that are working in plumbers, and I don't need to name every industry that uses pickup trucks. We're still going to use them. So I don't think, do buy Ram trucks. Go around, do your research, find out what companies are doing the best when it comes to developing motors with high emission standards and efficiencies. And, I can't start getting into the intricacies of the Ram truck power plant because that's not where I'm at. But I've got all day to talk about carbon tax and pickup trucks. I don't think that, that's just real life. I'll sit around a campfire and talk about saving the planet, and you'll say, well, there's emissions coming off that campfire. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Is Dr. Leach ready to rock and roll? He's still frozen.
We've lost him completely.
Oh, we've lost him completely.
So
that's too bad.
He might rejoin us, but
okay.
keeping tabs
Well,
on it.
I think that we got a sort of a good sense of where he's at. It's kind of unfortunate. We'll see if I'm going to tell him right now. Chime back in if you can, pal. Send Dr. Leach a message because I did want to circle back. Kind of the obvious. The strategy here with the interview was to circle back and say, okay, so if we were to design a made in Alberta tax or made in Alberta solution, if you want to call it that, what did the original Notley carbon tax get right? And what would need to change on that? And if Andrew Leach joins us, we can see. But I think that's an interesting question. I'm curious to know how Premier Jason Kenney plays this one.
Yeah, I think Dr. Leach is right in that Jason Kenney, if we've learned anything in the time that, not just the time that he's been in government, but just the time that he's been in Alberta, is that, the NDP is not his opposition. Ottawa is his opposition. He finds the NDP to just be an annoyance across the aisle from him in Alberta. But, he's really always campaigning against Ottawa. So there's no way that he puts his own solution in place. The only way that I could maybe see that is if he tries to spin this and say, we've had this plan all along. It's way better than the federal one's ever going to be. It's, based on some homegrown research in Alberta and blah, blah, blah. Like, Jason Kenney and the Mats can spin this whatever way that they want to. I think it'll be disingenuous whichever way they want. The fact is, he cruised in here in his big blue truck and said, Alberta, you're not paying the carbon tax anymore, and I'm going to fight for it. And he lost.
Yeah, well,
so he needs to figure out what to do next.
People have, and people have been saying to me, critical of, I tweeted last week, I said, the tweet kind of like went in some weird directions with how people perceived it, but I essentially said, let me be clear. Just for fun, I threw that in there.
Of course.
But I said, let me be clear. Jason Kenney essentially knew full well he was going to lose this challenge. And some people are saying, well, no, he didn't know. He didn't know he was going to lose. Okay, fair. Nobody knows that they're going to lose. Well, most people don't. OJ won. I mean, anybody can win. Did he really compare the carbon to no. But the point is, and the point of my tweet was that it's not about the win at the Supreme Court. A win would be a bonus. Is Leach ready to go? Okay.
Yeah, he is.
I'm not going to punt. I'm not going to bloviate when we have Dr. Andrew Leach ready to join us again. Welcome back. You'll be relieved.
Thanks. I don't know what happened there.
Well,
Sorry about that.
you'll be relieved to know that your freeze face actually made you look somewhat contemplative. Like it wasn't some weird you had a dignified freeze face when your feed froze on us, so that's a good thing.
You always know when Adobe is going to update is when your entire computer grinds to a halt for an unexplained reason for like 3 minutes, and you just know that's what's coming.
That's right. Well, now you're all updated and ready to rock and roll. So let's jump right back in. I was lamenting the fact that I didn't get an opportunity to circle back and say, okay, Notley's plan, and Alberta's grassroots I can't even say that with a straight face, but Alberta's plan, Alberta's carbon tax introduced by the former premier, it almost better than anybody else. What did it get right? And if Alberta were to roll out a made in Alberta plan, what would you change with a few years now under your belt, with an understanding of how it works and what's most effective?
Sure. So I think the big difference is what would the marching orders be from the premier? So when Rachel Notley gave us a problem to solve, so to speak, she gave us 4 things she wanted. She wanted the coal phase out. She wanted carbon pricing that was credible nationally and internationally. She wanted renewable power, so help for renewable power, and she wanted an energy efficiency agency. So we can pretty much cross off 2 or 3 of those that are not going to be immediately on Jason Kenney's agenda, or at least not policy priorities. So if you're pitching it to Jason Kenney, you turn around and say, that tax shift logic to say this as, if we're going to have a greenhouse gas policy, this is the most efficient economically that you can have, and it will allow you to lower other taxes. And a lot of the businesses you're trying to attract, whether it be film and television, engineering, tech, et cetera, they're relatively low emissions businesses. And so for them, they're much more interested in a low income tax rate than they're interested in a low carbon tax rate. So you can pitch those, you can pitch a lower deficit if that were his priority. But I think the differences between the policies are going to be mostly what you do with the revenue. And then, of course, I heard your previous guest or you were reading out one of the comments in terms of the structure, if any, of a rebate. So if you're going to do a direct consumer rebate, is it going to be, the same to everybody? Is it going to be more like the federal rebate where it's targeted more to rural residents versus urban residents? I think all of those come down to what is the government of the day's policy priority. And there'd be no question there'd be differences between Premier Kenney and then Premier Notley on those files.
This was the tweet that I was talking about. This was one that actually got you and I talking because you disagreed with me. And I said, let me be clear. Kenney knew full well he'd lose his lawsuit versus the feds. The fight, not the win, matters most. If downtown Calgary sees Jason Kenney throwing punches via the courts, the war room, or elsewhere, he's happy to spend our money. Now, I know some people got hung up, and fair enough, and that's fine. And maybe I'd go back and tweak or rewrite it. People are saying, well, it wasn't a guarantee that he'd lose. And fair enough. I'll concede that. The point of my tweet is to say that this almost is, I see it almost as the win would be the bonus, and the fight, the bluster, the bravado. People are saying he promised to fight the feds, and so he's fighting the feds, so he's living up to his promise. He's making good on his promise, and he deserves to be, celebrated or recognized for that. To me, I I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's productive to compare fighting in the Supreme Court, arguing in the Supreme Court, let me say, and taking on a Bigfoot cartoon. It's not the same thing, but it's coming from the same government and it's coming from the same mentality. And ultimately it's the mandates are coming out of the same office to a certain degree. And that's the part that I kind of take issue with, is that it's hard to separate the serious from the ridiculous. You know what I'm saying?
I agree, and I think you're the last part of your tweet is entirely correct. That Premier Kenney, for all intents and purposes, the War Room is a political action committee. It's a slush fund of provincial dollars that's going to tell people how much Jason Kenney is fighting on their behalf. And that's an egregious use of provincial dollars, and the whole idea of putting it outside the government to me seems. Again, it's designed to obfuscate. It's designed to take transparency away. So all of that is terrible. And you're right. The fight is what we're after. But I think, we don't want to stop and say that there aren't going to be legitimate reasons for a federal or for a provincial government to push back and for them to do so, for example, in the Supreme Court. And I mentioned on email one of the previous ones that we have an example of that being the Premier Lougheed fighting the federal government's authority to tax natural gas. And in that case, again, they put a lot of money and resources into building a case. They even went out and bought producing natural gas assets to create that case that it was provincial gas that was being taxed by the federal government. The federal government didn't have the authority to do that. They contrived this whole thing and went to the Supreme Court and won. And it was a big part of the laying the groundwork for more provincial autonomy on resources.
So where does the focus go now for engaged citizens, the people that are going to download this podcast, Andrew, they're going to listen to this interview, and they're not every single day spending 6 hours reading Hansard or transcripts or digging into the nitty gritty, the muck and mire of daily politicking. What's the story now moving forward as far as you're concerned?
I think the story is that this isn't over, that the fight's about whether it's a political fight or a legal fight about carbon pricing as a tool and about action on climate change in general is not over. It's probably really still just getting started. And you mentioned Aaron O'Toole in your lead into this section. I think he said yesterday that his climate plan is coming within months. And that's the one that I think we need to watch for next, to say, what is Aaron O'Toole going to do? And I'll say this, I've had, there are a few politicians who pick up the phone and call me when they, have questions about carbon policy. And I've had the opportunity to chat with Aaron O'Toole about this a long time ago before he was leader. But, my sense is he takes this problem more seriously than people are giving him credit for. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what's in his plan and if he can win over that grassroots that you talked about, that obviously as a voting bloc does not feel that climate change is a problem they should be addressing. So this is going to be the big test of his leadership. And then as a follow-on to that, it's going to be one of the big underpinnings of our next election.
Yeah. I don't know, with regards to Aaron O'Toole, I think sometimes, and again, this, like, the political strategists that listen to this may go, oh, Jesperson, this is why you're not a political strategist. But every once in a while,
same.
Yeah. But every once in a while, leaders have to say, like, kind of what he said. What did he say? I want to read the exact quote. He said, I'm the leader, I'm in charge. Which is kind of what Jason Kenney said when he was asked about his grassroots guarantee and all this. And I think he said at the end of the day, I'm the one holding the pencil or something like that. But we know that, in my opinion, and I think that it's shared widely, the Conservatives spend a lot of time sort of re-earning votes that are already guaranteed. And because, it is an important balance, but really, if you look at ultimately the threats to the Conservative Party of Canada in the last election, like, what were they really? Like, in some ridings, maybe they'd swing, based on an issue to the Liberals or something, but really, what was it? The People's Party of Canada? Seriously? It was an absolute joke. And so if I'm Aaron O'Toole, I'm going to recognize, because I don't think he's stupid, that you better do something. Voters in Vancouver and Toronto said it. They said that if Andrew Scheer would have had what they could even justify as some form of a legitimate climate plan, they would have been happy to vote for the Conservatives. And I think that there are probably more people in Canada than the average, CPC member might assume that are open-minded to it, but it's going to require, I hate to say bold vision, but it's going to require that from Aaron O'Toole.
Yeah.
And he knows it.
And, I don't actually think the table stakes for him are that high, right? I think what he needs right now, Andrew Scheer's climate plan was essentially non-existent. So Andrew Scheer almost gets recognition if he has a remotely credible, Aaron O'Toole gets recognition, even if he comes to the table with something that makes you go, maybe he's not completely unserious about this. Whereas I think that the stakes for Justin Trudeau, what can he bring to the table in the next election on this file? There's a very different opening expectation. So I think there's an opportunity for him. And it's something that, I'd love to see that fight, right? I'd love to see the fight where you have a credible conservative sort of small government climate change plan that has that credibility, and then contrast that against the Liberal plan, and then contrast that about whatever the Greens and NDP are going to bring to the table with being able to change everything, next Tuesday.
Yeah. Dr. Andrew Leach, Associate Professor at the Alberta School of Business. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for doing the show.
Thanks. Sorry for the tech bobble there.
No, it's fine. We roll with it. We enjoy that type of stuff. Thanks, Andrew. I don't know if we enjoy it, Sam, but it gives us a chance to check in with one another.
Yeah, okay. We can roll with it.
It gives us a chance to check in on the chatterbox.
I can't say a guest dropping out has ever been an enjoyable experience for me. It's usually just abject panic over on this side of the room.
Yeah,
but,
I do have to say that's based on I'm walking in these shoes and you're walking in those.
Okay, that's fine.
Because for me, it's when a guest drops out, it's somewhat relaxing. It's really not my problem. It's more your problem than it's my problem. Although all of the guests dropping out would very much be my problem. So we're lucky to have you here, Sam. The team at Friesen Brothers is thrilled at the response that they've been getting from Real Talkers with the opening of their 15th store back at the beginning of this month. The 15th Alberta location in South Edmonton, just off the Anthony Henday at Rabbit Hill Road, showcasing amazing Alberta producers. And what a lot of you have been chiming in on, what a lot of you are excited about, and I love this one. I read this feedback a while ago from Kim, who said, Jespo, all you do is you talk about meat. You talk about their smoker and their smoked bacon and their sausage and their braised beef short rib. And oh, geez. I mean, Denise on this email, too. Here I go again, Denise. I can't help myself. But she said, you got to tell. She said so many Real Talkers would be thrilled to know how many vegan and vegetarian offerings they have and clearly labeled. And it's true. I told you when I was there, I tried their Montreal smoked tofu. Woo! Not bad. Not bad. In my personal opinion, I'm not going to say it's better than Montreal smoked meat, but it's not bad. You can find Friesen Brothers across Alberta, Alberta grown and Alberta owned. The teams at Dairy Queen, Northwest Edmonton, and Sherwood Park want to remind you that every night can be date night for $5. That's right, for $5 every night after 8 p.m. You can show up and mix and match any two medium dipped cones and sundaes, two for $5 after 8 p.m. 7 nights a week at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Make sure you let them know you're a Real Talker when you're there. Also, a shout out to the team at Clean Air Club. Hey, I don't want to brag, Sam. I don't mean to brag. I mean to act like a big shot here, but I would like to note that I changed my furnace filter last week.
Well done.
Yeah, I know. And you know what? I saved money and I'm breathing easier.
Now let me guess. You had to change the furnace filter. You had to get out the toolbox. You had to disassemble
such
a huge
hassle.
panel.
Such a hassle.
No.
It literally takes 3 seconds.
I know.
It takes
so
3
easy.
seconds. So why do we wait so long? The team at Clean Air Club on their website, cleanairclub.ca, is ready to take your sign up. They make it so easy. Oftentimes it's the next day. They drop off the furnace filters on your front doorstep. You pay less than you would in the store, plus they give you a little free gift. It's their way of supporting local at cleanairclub.ca. Our next guest is a very good friend of mine, and I'm excited to have her back on the show, joining us out of Toronto. She's doing a whole bunch of new stuff, which is very cool, having recently on her own terms left a pretty high-profile talk radio gig in Toronto. She's now senior counsel at Enterprise Canada. She's a visiting researcher at Ryerson University's Journalism Research Center, and she's a panelist. Of course, you see her on Power and Politics, on CBC, and probably more prominently right here on Real Talk. Supriya Dwivedi, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. I mean, who can complain with that kind of an intro, Ryan?
Well, probably Vashi Capellos, who's going to maybe take issue with the fact that I'm claiming to be higher profile in power and politics. Of course, she would know I'm kidding. When the technical producer doubles over in laughter, we know that we're just joking. It's good. First of all, how the hell are you? How are you doing? It's been a while since we've connected.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm currently coming to you from my in-laws' basement. I'm kind of like in a bunker a little bit. I don't know if you can see that.
Okay, yeah.
But that's because we're putting our house up for sale, so we're all sort of huddled into in-law HQ, as it were.
May I first of all compliment you on the luxurious design of your leather chair. It looks to me like I would imagine that when you sit in a chair like that, you're more inclined to make important decisions.
Well, I am coming to you from a laundry room, so I felt like I needed the leather chair to instill a sense of importance.
Okay,
you know?
If you wouldn't have let us know, we would have never been able to tell. But you pull it off well. What's the Toronto real estate when someone, because you and your family, you guys are kind of right in the heart of the action, aren't you? Right now, what's Toronto real estate looking like these days?
Insane.
Yeah.
In a word, incredibly competitive. So on the one hand, for us putting our house up, that's of course good news, but we are intending to buy as well, and that just factors into the whole thing. I mean, houses go over asking quite regularly. I don't know how anybody gets into this market initially without any sort of help. We certainly did to be able to get in, and it's nuts. It's seemingly that for our generation and the generation that's coming up under us, Ryan, it's like, I don't know how anybody's going to own a home in the GTA anyway.
Well, I don't even know the generation coming up under us. I don't even know if they care about owning homes. You keep hearing that from people that say that the younger generation, like Gen Z, I'm not going to speak on their behalf, but maybe they care less about owning homes, and maybe they care less about things like owning vehicles. I don't know. It could turn some industries, including people's nest eggs, on their head. But I'm talking to friends in Calgary, same thing in Vancouver, but most especially Calgary, where the real estate market there is pretty heated. And at the same time, they've got 30% office vacancies downtown, and there's a lot of pretty dire economic forecasting going on. And I'm trying to reconcile the two. Like, I'm not sure who's buying and building all these beautiful new homes, and who is going sort of over asking on all these houses with so many people out of work. But it's just one of those things, I guess.
Yeah, to be fair, with respect to Gen Zers not necessarily wanting to own homes, I feel like they said the same thing about millennials, didn't they?
Yeah, probably. They probably said the same thing about us. Every generation coming up is like, this is the generation that doesn't, and then we're just all the same. I was just talking to Dr. Andrew Leach about, and we haven't talked a ton about this, but I've been looking forward to connecting with you, and I wanted to ask you about this. Conservative Party of Canada leader Erin O'Toole brushing off the idea sort of mid-last week that a vote by the party's grassroots on climate change, on recognizing climate change as essentially an existential threat, that it should influence the broader population's perception of the Conservatives. Do you think, I don't want to say how damaging, I want to ask, do you think it damages the party to see the grassroots vote no to something like this?
I think it does, not necessarily because of the vote itself, but more so because of the coverage that happened after the fact, right? I mean, there were multiple headlines across multiple media outlets where the TLDR version was Conservatives vote down motion saying climate change is real. And that is incredibly damning, especially when the Conservatives do need to make inroads into urban and suburban ridings, around the GTA, around Vancouver, other areas across the country as well, obviously. And they're not necessarily doing too well with that voter demographic. They're not doing too well as a whole with millennials. They're not doing too well as a whole with women. They're not doing too well as a whole with Gen Zers. So with respect to where they're going to get their votes next election, I mean, something's got to give. But I do give Mr. O'Toole a lot of credit here for, after the vote had taken place, basically him saying, and his TLDR version was, well, too bad, I'm the leader and I'm going to have my own plan. I think it will just be very interesting to see what that plan will obviously consist of, because it's all well and good to say you have a plan, but then let's see what that actually is.
Yeah, for people that haven't dug into it. So basically, here's the deal. The existing document, the party's official policy document, does acknowledge climate change. The party's 2019 election platform, the election you and I worked together in Toronto, said that climate change does exist, but this would have included the line climate change is real, and perhaps more meaningfully, or maybe equally as meaningfully, it added language that highly polluting Canadian businesses take responsibility for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and be held accountable for results. It also would have stated that the party believes in supporting innovation and in green technologies. So I wonder if maybe for some people it was kind of maybe where it got more specific, or maybe it was laying some things at the feet of businesses that some people may believe are inclined to be packing up shop based on some taxation structures. I mean, there could be more to it. What we see from the Liberals, though, is an opportunity to continue to paint this party as climate change deniers, and this is probably Erin O'Toole's biggest challenge.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the other thing that the Liberals and even the NDP and the Greens have going for them with respect to painting the Conservatives with a broad brush on this isn't necessarily just with climate, right? But kind of like anti-science or anti-evidence or anti-expert as a whole. And of course, in the middle of a friggin' pandemic, being anti-science and being anti-expert isn't necessarily where you want to park your vote when an election is possibly looming. And so I think when we're talking about this kind of big picture analysis, it's also worth noting that with respect to the Conservatives' own branding and how voters tend to perceive them, this kind of folds into the larger narrative and the larger picture of them being perhaps a little bit more old school, a little bit more traditional, not necessarily listening to the concerns of younger Canadians or urban and suburban Canadians. And that is kind of what I was getting to in the opening there, because that is a much larger problem for them than just the one specific policy vote down on climate change. Yeah.
What's your general, you and I haven't really spoken a ton over the number of months that we've seen Erin O'Toole start to put his stamp on the party. Is there anything, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's been any sort of dramatic turn of anything. I wouldn't say that the party is dramatically different. Maybe they're taking it in some interesting angles on how they're advertising him as leader, kind of as the guy walking down the street with the open collar saying, hey, if you don't know me, I'm Erin O'Toole. I'm the leader of Canada's Conservatives. It's all kind of casual, right? He says, anyway, got to get back to work, and he walks off camera. So we didn't really see that from Andrew Scheer. But how would you characterize Erin O'Toole's leadership, at this point in his tenure, relatively early?
I mean, it's tough, right, for any opposition leader to really break their way through the news cycle and to do it in a way where they're not necessarily seen as just beating up on the government. So I do recognize that. But one thing I will say about Mr. O'Toole versus Mr. Scheer is that right away, and I don't, this isn't necessarily as a shot at Scheer, but like, O'Toole just seems much more comfortable in his skin. And I feel like that could potentially make a pretty big difference for the Conservatives campaigning a little bit further down the line. I think Andrew Scheer, he came across as a little bit rigid, and it was weird because, I mean, I interviewed the guy when I was still on air in Toronto, and he was very, affable, had a great personality, but it's like the second that he knew that the mic was on and that we were live, he sort of just like froze and tensed up. And I don't necessarily see that with O'Toole. So I hope his team probably recognizes that, and I'm sure they'll start putting him in front of a mic and in front of cameras and doing a little, some of the more intimate meet and greets, if you will, to sort of get that message across.
The loss in the Supreme Court, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and your home province of Ontario. Although your home province is Quebec, technically, isn't it?
Always.
Yeah, La Belle Province. but let's say your province of residence in Ontario. I would imagine Alberta and Saskatchewan, to paint everybody with one big broad brush, probably perceived the news to a certain degree along the same lines. But you wonder how that may have resonated in Queen's Park or whatever. How would you say your fellow Ontarians felt about the loss at the Supreme Court?
I think, even though a chunk of Conservatives probably don't want to admit it, I'd have to imagine that they saw this possibility coming, right? I mean, on a balance of probabilities, basically every expert in the lead up to this was saying that it was likely that the Supreme Court was going to rule in favor of the feds on this. I think what's problematic for Conservatives, just again, going forward, is in taking this fight all the way to the Supreme Court, they've kind of dug their own hole. And if, even the way we talked about this entire Supreme Court, battle, if you will, was kind of missing the larger point. And I think the Conservatives didn't necessarily, and I'm saying that Conservatives writ large, like across the different provinces and federally as well, didn't necessarily make their case super well to Canadians, because this is now going to be an encroachment of federal, competence or federal jurisdiction on territory that is originally usually seen as provincial jurisdiction. And when you're talking about issues that are of national concern, I mean, again, in the middle of a pandemic, arguably that can be expanded. And if you're a conservative, not just necessarily a capital C conservative, but if you have, small c conservative ideals and you want to see more power given to the provinces and less to Ottawa, this judgment is very bad. And, again, going forward with respect to some of the concentration of power in cabinet versus, MPs writ large, I think, again, this judgment is very bad if you're a small c conservative. And it'll be interesting to see what other implications that'll have further down the line. But again, when we were talking about this, at least in the media, a lot of how it was framed was the carbon tax is bad, and not necessarily, linking it back to the more substantive arguments about separating that federal, power from provincial power.
Yeah, and you're going to, to state the obvious, but you're going to see this differently as well as a lawyer. Just with regards to your professional training and the way that you understand how stories go and how court procedures work. Did you read anything that you're not seeing necessarily reported? Let me ask you this. If you were hosting your own talk show and you were doing a monologue this morning, what might be one of the things that you would focus on as noteworthy? People talked about the existential threat of climate change, but that wasn't the only impetus for many of the justices, for the 6 of them ruling the way that they did, right? 6-3, I don't know if you read into that as an interesting number, obviously not unanimous. What did you pick out of it?
The one thing that I think is really interesting is actually to read the dissent, because if you read the dissent from the justices, those 3 judges that did dissent from the majority, it's interesting to hear their arguments laid out with respect to the potential federal incursion on what would traditionally be seen as provincial competence or jurisdiction. And I think one thing that we miss, and if I had my own show that I was monologuing about, one thing that we miss when we talk about climate change just writ large is that we only tend to frame it as terms of like the environment versus the economy. And we're missing this huge, huge chunk of the conversation, which is that climate change is a threat multiplier. So what does that mean? It means that it exacerbates the threats that we are already facing. And that has such wide-ranging implications. And it, everything from infectious diseases to migration, to national security, to agriculture. And I just wish we could get out of this box of like carbon tax versus non-carbon tax to have, better, more substantive conversations about how we mitigate the effects of climate change going forward. And I think that's what's really been missing.
I'm so with you on that. Like to me, it's just it's such a, quite frankly, a dumb conversation. Would you rather pay more or less to heat your home? Well, that's not really what the conversation is, right? Would you rather pay, $68 or $72 to fill up your car? Like, well, that's not really what we're talking. That's kind of like the talking about the symptom, not the cause in so many different ways. Supriya Dwivedi is our guest. In just a minute, I want to ask her about vaccines and a third wave of COVID, plus a controversial report by Canadaland over the past couple of days. But I wanted to remind you right now at home that McBain Camera is Alberta's best destination for photographers and content creators. You can tell your story beautifully with that Nikon Z50 camera we've been telling you about. Stunning 4K Ultra HD with 1080p slow motion time-lapse mode and so many other features, including that LCD screen that flips down so you can activate self-portrait mode. Perfect for selfies.
I was talking to a friend who is a reputable filmmaker on the weekend, and we were talking about cameras, and he's been looking to buy one. He's like, the feature that I care about a lot is a movable screen. It's like when you're working in the field, that's so valuable to have, that screen that flips around.
It's huge.
It's huge, and I think it's underlooked quite a bit.
I love it. The Nikon Z50 has exactly that, and when you order the Z50 body or the full kit at McBainCamera.com and enter the promo code REALTALK, that's just one word, REALTALK, you'll get a free ProMaster Hitchhiker tabletop tripod with your order. Plus, you can shop safely at one of 6 convenient Alberta locations. McBain Camera in person and online. Also wanted to remind you, we're super excited to be participating with the University of Alberta's 3-minute thesis competition. That's the 3MT contest. It goes this Thursday, April 1st at 1 p.m. Mountain. You can join us live. I'm so excited to be hosting it. It's online at uab.ca/3MT. uab.ca/3MT. You know, there are thousands and thousands, literally thousands of graduate students at the U of A doing amazing research, and this is a really cool way to highlight the work that they're doing. We're going to be on Friday as part of our Real Talk Roundtable, 9 a.m. Mountain Time live, 11 a.m. Eastern, live here on Real Talk, featuring the first and second place finishers. I like to say first and first runner-up, as well as the People's Choice winner. So we'll have 3 big winners joining us on the show, showing off their research and educating all of us. You can learn more at uab.ca/3MT. Hanging out with Supriya Dwivedi this morning, and Supriya, pretty tough to ignore this, what people are describing as a third wave when it comes to this pandemic and the variants. It's either coming or it's here. And then the parallel storyline as hundreds of thousands of Canadians, get their vaccines, and we get closer and closer and closer to finding some comfort there, though we may need to establish some context. How are you feeling generally speaking about all this before we dig into the specifics?
I'm a pessimistic person at the best of times, so I will just say it's disheartening, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think in talking about the specifics of, vaccine versus variants and a third wave resurgence and ICU capacity, I think we missed the larger point, and it's important to kind of, say it to be able to ground us. But the fact that we have so many vaccines already available to us really is, a testament to science and just how great, of a time that we're living in, that we do have access to multiple vaccines that are using different platforms. And I think we should be very grateful for that. And that is the one time I will be optimistic and cheery, because now I'm going to go back to doom and gloom. And the doom and gloom is that the variants are in fact here. They are more transmissible. They are worse for you in that, hospitalization time tends to increase, and you are seeing on the ground younger and younger patients for the need to be admitted into the ICU. And so that is, just any way you look at it, that's not good. And I think the problem that we've sort of gotten ourselves into is that I worry that back, in November and in the lead up to December, when we were talking about this, we positioned vaccines as our get out of pandemic card, which of course it is in the larger sense, but I don't know if we properly prepared the public for the third wave that, again, every single expert said was going to come when we started seeing an uptick in those, various variants here in different provinces across the country. I don't know if the messaging had changed appropriately or not. In my view, it did not. But I think that's the problem we're in, is that a lot of people, and especially if you're a regular person who doesn't watch these pressers every day, who isn't addicted to the news, the last news you would have heard on this is probably that, Canada's procurement efforts have gone okay, and that we're, should be seeing a ramp up in vaccine delivery. And you're not necessarily paying attention to the daily case count. I mean, here in Ontario, the average 7-day case count is now slightly over 2,000 cases. Like, that's a lot. In Scarborough, they're having to take out patients from the ICU here and get them down to Kingston because they have more capacity. They're building field hospitals. Like, this is it's going to be bad. The next little bit is going to be quite bad.
This is interesting polling. We haven't really jumped into it. We do a question of the week every week with our partners at Y Station. They're our research and strategy partners, and our Patreon subscribers would have already seen this full top line report in their inboxes, but let's drop in on it for a second. This is a lot of data that's about to smack people in the face. There's a lot of numbers here to sort through, and I know that the text is tiny, but if you look at the bottom, look at this. So first of all, the red here that you'll see on this graph, with apologies to people that are listening to the podcast, the red represents percentages of people that would disagree with the statement you're going to hear. Yellow is neutral, and green is agree. Okay, so the first question, our provincial public health response, this is specific to Alberta, Supriya. Our provincial public health response was largely free from political considerations. 92% disagree. As a country, we were prepared for a pandemic like this. 71% disagree. But the numbers that I think are particularly interesting, look at, as we get closer to the bottom, lockdown measures on balance have done more good than harm. 75% agree with that. Lockdown measures were necessary. 90% agree. I guess we can talk about what lockdown means. And this is an interesting one. The vaccine was developed as quickly as it possibly could be while still being medically safe. 88% of respondents agree, which I think is pretty interesting.
It is, and somewhat heartening, especially since being addicted to news, you can really easily get into a point where you're just reading bad news after bad news, right? So that is quite the glimmer of hope. But with respect to the first question that you read out, Ryan, about how people view provincial response and it being free of politics, I'd be very curious to see how that, how different provinces would react to that. I would imagine it would be somewhat similar in a bunch of different provinces.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much politicking. And then, of course, you look at I think some of the more prominent provincial leaders, Jason Kenney and Doug Ford among them, and, their obvious inclination to support Canada's Conservatives as opposed to Justin Trudeau. And you might argue that it's inevitable. Are you anecdotally... no one's asking anybody to name names, but what are you seeing from, people around you, friends and family? I've got to be honest. Some of my friends have stated quite plainly. One of my friends the other day says, as soon as my parents, he says, as soon as the grandparents are vaccinated, then their behavior is going to change. They're not going to wait on, the health authorities to tell them they can do something for them. As soon as the patriarch and the matriarch are vaccinated, they can get back to their version of normal. Other people, friends of mine who, I see eye to eye with on a lot of things are going, yeah, I don't think I'm going to get the vaccine. I'm just not. And I'm going, what? That's my opinion versus their opinion. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing anecdotally a lot of people quite excited to get their parents in particular vaccinated, because if nothing else, it means that they can see kids again, right? Grandparents now are all of a sudden free for babysitting once again, which I'm sure makes quite the difference for a lot of parents out there. My sister lives in the US and she's now received 2 doses of her vaccine. So we're kind of itching for when her family can sort of, jump the border and get back here, because I haven't seen her in a year and I miss her kids. And I would like our kids to have a normal cousin relationship that they've sort of been robbed of the last year. My own view is that I'm, quite excited to roll up my sleeve and get that jab. But again, I worry about the public health messaging. I worry about how difficult it's been for seniors in particular to get out to get the vaccine. Ryan, I don't know if you've seen any of those pictures, but there's been quite a few vaccination lineup, clinics and pictures being taken in Ontario and in Montreal, where you have, Quebec, I should say, where you have just a gaggle of old people basically waiting, and they're in somewhat cramped quarters, waiting to get their vaccination. So I hope that doesn't turn off people, but I think more to the point, we need to also be getting vaccines to people. So if you're a homebound senior and you can't leave or don't feel like you can leave safely or in due time, then let's get the vaccine to them. I think the other thing that we need to be thinking about are those frontline workers, those essential workers that we once upon a time called heroes for working, supply chain logistics and for working warehouses and for, working working the front lines at grocery stores. Like, let's get them vaccinated, because at least from the data that I've been, privy to and that's been published, there's a huge difference between white collar workers who can work at home and should be working at home versus, more precarious workers, more marginalized workers that are working in these larger facilities and that don't have the ability to work from home. And so I would like to see that gap, narrowed ideally as soon as possible. It should have happened during the rollout of the vaccine, but I'll take, making a change of course as like second best.
Yeah, we've heard over the course, we took a week off. Over the course of the week off, had some correspondence from several pretty high profile representatives, including the president of the Alberta Firefighters Union, that was saying that they're not satisfied with regards to how that's being approached on their front. And I know that there are many different industries that are arguing that they should be vaccinated as soon as possible. Certainly a worthwhile conversation, especially considering the circumstances you've just detailed. Supriya, before we let you go, let me ask you about this. This is a pretty, when I saw this pop up on social media a few days ago, I went, oh boy, Canadaland, by way of Jonathan Goldsby reporting, as you can see it here, the columnist who covers Doug Ford, Ontario's premier for the Toronto Sun, lives with Doug Ford's press secretary. They're talking about relatively high-profile columnists Brian Lilley and Ivana Yelich. What do you make of this report?
I mean, there's a couple of things. The first is that this has more or less been a little bit of an open secret, right? Wherein people have known about this and nobody has really said anything. So I think that can cause a certain level of or distrust amongst, the general public and journalists. And whenever there's that kind of gap there, I think it's, in general terms, bad. But I think the other overall lesson for this is that if you're not a dick online, and you generally have a non-dickish online persona, people won't necessarily take pleasure or glee in when you have kind of effed up in a very public manner. And the reason why I say this is because there have been multiple screenshots by Twitter users that have been posted online in which Brian Lilley was going after other journalists for their perceived conflicts of interest, and in a lot of cases, they ended up being straight up wrong. So I think you kind of reap what you sow, right? And if I think he would probably be getting a lot more sympathy if he didn't necessarily try and pull the same thing on his fellow colleagues once upon a time. And, in a lot of cases, not that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about this one here, which you referenced, and Canadaland reports it. About Robert Benzie, Queen's Park bureau chief, married to Rhonda McMichael at that time, a top staffer for then Premier Kathleen Wynne, tweeted Brian Lilley coming up on 3 years ago. Here's something everybody covering Ontario politics needs to ask the Star about. Do they get leaks? And of course, he's waking up every morning with anyway. I just went like, it's also like, whoo, you know what I mean? Like, I would imagine if you're Jonathan Goldsby, I mean, again, like you said, if you're not a dick, the headhunters may not come for you. But even still, if I were to file a story like this, I'd have my finger over published for probably quite a while before I actually clicked it. It's you don't see a report like this every day. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
No, and I think that's to the point that I was saying, right, about it being kind of an open secret amongst journalists and it not being widely shared amongst the public. So there are these things that happen. And I mean, look, when you're working in close quarters, it's not unheard of, obviously, to pair up romantically. And nobody is faulting two people for, like, insert the joke here of having found love in a hopeless place, that is Queen's Park or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, it's just that, to that general rule, is that if you're not generally dickish, then people won't be dickish to you. And I just think it's really interesting also to see the response that you saw emanating from the Premier's office, which was to attack Goldsby rather personally and rather directly, which I think is a shame in all this as well.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, there were like some weight blasts and some saying that he looked like he
suggested he was a virgin or something.
Yeah, it was just kind of like a weird. But okay, so I'm trying to get this up, this photo here as soon as possible. I want to show this to you. So this is, I don't know if you're friends with Althea Raj. I would consider myself to be a casual friend of hers. I certainly respect her as a journalist. There was like somebody posted this photo. I'll show you here a while ago. This was before the federal election debate, and there's Althea Raj, who was one of the debate moderators with Gerald Butts. Obviously, Justin Trudeau's, inner circle pal, and at that time, what was he at that time? Not principal secretary or something.
No, I think he was principal secretary.
Was he
at
that time?
Yeah.
And I remember people saying this was like this explosive photo of Althea Raj having a glass of wine with Gerald Butts, and I guess on one hand I can understand people are saying, well, this was right before the debate, and how do we know that she wasn't giving him or he wasn't giving her questions or whatever. At the same time, I can think of like how many people would go for drinks or would network or would talk behind the scenes or on the record or off the record. And part of me, I guess, and maybe some might accuse me of being naive, didn't understand that to be a completely explosive scenario. I mean, the list of people that I've been for drinks with maybe not this past year, but the year before, spans the political spectrum from like far left to, I won't say hard right, but certainly right-wing conservatives. And I would consider many, if not most of them, to be either amicable relationships or productive professional relationships or even friends. So, yeah, I kind of didn't know with regards to this report. I do think it's relevant. It also made me a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I mean, to your point, I apologize if it was right before the last round of debates, and Gerald Butts wouldn't have been his principal secretary at the time. So you're right on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, journalists meet with all sorts of people all the time to get stories on background, to confirm things, right? And you also just to share gossip. Let's call a spade.
Yeah, exactly. It's really good to see you again. Thank you for taking time. We've got some really helpful suggestions from live viewers right now that are saying, one, for example, said that you can actually have a wonderful mental exercise. It can be very calming to watch towels dry in the dryer. I don't know if you have a front load dryer, but maybe next interview you could. Anyway, always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for doing this.
Always a pleasure, Ryan.
You got it. You can follow Supriya Dwivedi on Twitter, and of course, she's doing amazing things. Keep an eye out for her on CBC's Power and Politics, and doing a ton of great work as well on a number of different fronts, including Ryerson University, sort of renowned for their journalism program. The team at Eden Landscaping, I don't know, I think of all of our partners, the team at Eden's got to be pretty darn excited about where the seasons are going right now, because more and more of us are realizing that we can start emerging. We can start heading outside and enjoying our backyards, and maybe even in small outdoor gatherings, starting to connect with some people under the rules, and maybe in a brand new setup. So whether that's going to be a beautiful fitted stone patio, maybe a fire pit for the first time, an outdoor cooking station, maybe you're finally going to look after that retaining wall that's starting to sag and the neighbors are wondering what your plan is with that whole thing. Heck, maybe it's a swim spa because you've had to cancel your last 2 vacations and you got a little extra cash in your jeans. The team at Eden Landscaping is ready to help you design it and build it at landscapeedmonton.ca. You can find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. That's also where you'll find the team at Local Waste. They want to fight for your business and they love talking trash. They've been doing it for more than 25 years, from the small ma and pa independently owned retail stores all the way up to the big hotels and malls and grocery stores. Local Waste wants to find a solution that fits you. You call them on a first name basis, Chris, Lauren, Mikkel, or you look them up at localwaste.ca and find a solution that'll work for your business at Local Waste. I thought it might be a good opportunity, Sam, to dig a little deeper into the results of our question of the week. It obviously was a while ago since more than 750 of you completed the surveys at ryanjesperson.com. Obviously, we did have our week off, and the team at Y Station, it gave them some extra time to really dig in and to put together what we call a top-line report, which is some really interesting information. So before we show you anything on the screen, and Sam, you'll have those graphics done up by the team at Y Station, we asked you about the impact that this pandemic has had on you and on the people around you, on your career, on your personal life, in your relationships. And it was interesting because we saw some uplifting feedback and sometimes heartbreaking as well. And the team at Y Station put together almost an extra full page, actually almost 2 pages of extra commentary. And this is where we really glean insight into how you're feeling. You can click on agree or disagree or yes or no, but sometimes when you put it into your own words, it really means a lot. So we feel that, based on these results, that COVID is about a cumulative impact, maybe not as much a direct impact. Right? So direct impact meaning contracted COVID, lost a loved one to COVID, or lost your job. We saw more difficulty from you indicated with the realization that no matter consequences, a lot of people just simply don't listen to decided science. And it was also interesting, as we pointed out with Supriya just a few moments ago, to see how many of you believed in the importance of lockdown measures. So let's take a look at some of the key findings, Sam. These are provided to us. I mean, obviously, they're your answers, Real Talkers, but the team at Y Station, 92% of audience members say that some aspect of their life is permanently changed, more than 9 in 10. as a result of COVID-19. I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's take a look at another sort of, this is the 10,000-foot view here. Another one. Other countries were better prepared than us. 27%, just over 1 in 4 of you said, yeah, other countries were better prepared than us. 37%, almost 4 out of 10 said, nah, Canada was either with the other countries or on par or maybe even a little bit better than some other countries. I mean, these might be difficult things. I mean, this is all based on someone's gut feeling, right?
I guess I'd also just like to point out, what countries are you comparing us to?
Sure. Are you comparing us to?
Yeah, other G7 countries, the whole world writ large, other countries in North America. It's just this system it's taken different effects globally all over the place that country comparisons just aren't apples to apples anymore. They're
100%.
just not.
100%. Let's take a look at another key finding, and then we'll get into some of the nitty gritty here, because there really is some interesting data that I think you're going to be interested in, like how many of you, for example, had a family member or close friend get sick. 33%. What about this, though? Let's get to this, Sam. This is a good one. 15% of listeners think that lockdown measures have done more harm than good. 75%, meantime, thought that lockdown measures have been net positive. Here's another thing that I think we need to wrestle with. I think that you could argue effectively and convince most people that we have not yet participated in a really meaningful lockdown.
I would agree.
If you're going to call it a lockdown, it would imply to me that most of regular life is placed on pause.
Yeah, and I think that the closest thing here, certainly here in Alberta, but just in Canada in general, that we've had to a lockdown is right when the pandemic started, right? When everything was just kind of screeched to a halt, and we all kind of just stayed home for the first month wondering what the next move was. I think that's the closest we've ever been to lockdown, but when you look at countries that meaningfully, completely locked down, Australia, it's a completely different animal than what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, take a look at New Zealand, Australia. Well, let's look at these numbers. 33% of respondents had a family member or close friend get sick with COVID-19. That's significant. 1 out of 3. 21%, more than 1 in 5, lost a job, or significantly lost hours, or lost a business. 1 in 5. How about this? On the happy side, 17% gained a new family member. And we counted animals in there too. So, Sam, you would qualify.
I qualify on both the lost a job and gained a family member.
Yeah?
Yes, I am in both of those buckets.
And got a job.
And got a job, yes. And then got a job, I know.
Yeah.
It's been a weird year.
Yeah, 16% lost a family member. 16%. 14% got a new job or started a new business. Both you and I would qualify there. 5% lost a major relationship in their life. 5% through divorce or estrangement. 5%. I wonder if the divorce impact here, I don't even wonder. I suspect that it's safe to say that number would increase as time goes on.
I think so.
This is speculation.
It's speculation, but I also think that, forgive me, I don't know if we've necessarily completely qualified what a meaningful relationship is, but I have 2 people that I used to consider friends that don't talk to me anymore.
Because you're working with me?
Yeah, that's exactly no. Because early in the pandemic, I called them out on kind of taking COVID a little bit too lightly, and they just shut me out of their life.
And that's it.
And that was it. Huh. And it was a little heartbreaking, I gotta say.
Yeah,
really
that sucks. That sucks. I've lost friends over dumb things before. Maybe today is the day when we all reach back out and reestablish contact. When we asked you who you think has shown the right type of leadership over the last year, look at this. Look what you told us. 93% of you said that frontline healthcare workers have shown the right kind of leadership. 93%. 75% of you believe that frontline service and retail workers have shown leadership, which is still an overwhelming majority. Federally elected officials get a 65% approval rating of sorts from our audience. 57% of municipally elected officials, in other words, 57% of the audience said that they've seen the right kind of leadership from municipally elected officials. I'm just going to show you this. I mean, this is unbelievable. When it comes to provincially elected officials, so federally elected officials get 65%. Municipally elected officials get 57%. Provincially elected officials get 3%. 3% of respondents said that they believe that provincially elected officials have shown the right kind of leadership in the last year. That's unbelievable. Dr. Dina Hinshaw, tough marks from you. Real Talkers, 34% say that the chief public health officer, although some may as well be applying that to Dr. Theresa Tam, to be fair. And private companies facing shutdowns saw 18% support. So that's kind of an interesting one. When we asked what has been the most surprising element of COVID-19 for you, 43%, which is the highest number here, 43% said the ability for people to ignore public health advice despite widespread, consistent warnings. 30% of you were surprised at the speed at which the vaccine has been developed and deployed. 18% of you were surprised at how significantly COVID-19 seemed to affect so many different elements of our lives. I think for the most part, you could argue that there is no, I mean, maybe with exception, but there's virtually no element of life left untouched or unimpacted in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that.
Let's read what Real Talkers had to say. These are the comments. I mean, let me just read some of these out to you. How will COVID-19 permanently change certain aspects of our lives? More scrutiny about people coming into work sick, seeing masks as more commonplace, which I think is intuitive here. More flexibility to work from home, a greater look into economic ideas like universal basic incomes, a realization that moving away from medical manufacturing in Canada was a bad idea. You might want to call that pharmaceutical sovereignty or research sovereignty, research security. Yeah. Let's use the same phrases that we use for finances and energy.
No, that's fair. It's just it's one of those things I didn't put those terms together in my brain yet. Yeah.
Listener says my entire perspective on supporting local has changed. I'll be way more conscious to do so moving forward. I feel the same way. I felt strongly about supporting local before. I am passionate about it now. Yeah. Listener says, as a retired senior who's traveled extensively in the last 5 years, I resent having lost an entire year. I resent that my surgery scheduled for April 2020 was rescheduled to this month. I resent that I've had no contact with my 3- and 5-year-old grandkids except FaceTime, but all of this a new reality. Another said, entitlement to unburdened mingling has been removed. Caution will now be ever present. We used to joke about close talkers. Mm-hmm. Close talkers are not a joke anymore. Close talkers are a liability, right? Chris Henderson, who's the chief strategist at Y Station, put his own notes onto this. He said, this next comment showed up in various permutations so many times. In a sentence, what has been the most difficult part of COVID-19 for you? So many people said loneliness and isolation. Chris says that easily 20% of responses were not seeing family has been excruciating. The lack of consistent leadership at government levels, having our kids at home during work hours. How about this from a parent watching my boys struggle? They have incredible difficulty staying engaged and focused. Says also my wife is a high-intensity fitness instructor, and that's been a nightmare with rolling restrictions, inadequate government communication, and confusing closures. Another says, I'm worried about friendships and other relationships just ending or fizzling out or being very different. In a sentence, we asked you, please tell us the most dramatic way that the last year has changed you as a person. One says, it forced me to reevaluate myself. I have lost over 100 pounds and quit smoking. Wow. Let me join you in that. So
that is incredible.
A unanimous
well done. Yes.
100 pounds down and quit smoking. Another says, I've realized what's important to me, how I want to spend my time. I love this. Listener says, I've become fundamentally more happy. I have social anxiety. Not having to see people has been amazing. That's maybe an under-discussed perspective. There are a lot of people that are probably so relieved that they're not required to be at fundraisers and galas and cocktail parties and AGMs.
Yeah, I the funny thing is like, you know me, I'm like you. I'm a super extrovert. I like being around people. I like the energy. I like that kind of stuff. I empathize and can absolutely see the value in the pandemic learning to say no to things. That is a thing that probably very personally to me, I found myself just way more comfortable to having just a little bit more personal agency over what I want to do,
Totally.
Not feeling like you have to be involved in everything.
I want to read some more of these. These are amazing. I'm so like, I profess my love to you Real Talkers every single day, and I mean it, because you take the time, you wear your hearts on your sleeve, and you send these comments into a show so we can put them out for public consumption. I so appreciate it. In a sense, again, to remind you the question that these folks are answering. Tell us the most dramatic way that the last year has changed you as a person. I love this. A parent says, the profound gratitude, the time I've had to spend with my teenage boys. That's amazing. Another says, I've loved seeing dogs in online meetings. Yes, we love when interviews
And
are...
online interviews.
And online
Absolutely.
interviews. We welcome dogs and cats. We haven't really had a lot outside of that. We would welcome iguanas. We have
Maybe get a guinea pig in
you
there.
could do a guinea pig.
Get a rabbit. We could get
a chinchilla.
Ooh, a chinchilla.
It's just fun to say.
Yeah. I know some people with hedgehogs. That'd be fun.
There's a family. I shouldn't even, yeah. There are some folks that live relatively close to us, and they have they have like exotic birds.
Ooh.
Except for they are loud. And I wonder, I love walking past their house because I can pick and choose when I walk past their house. And I close my eyes, and if the sun hits my face, I feel like I'm in Costa Rica for a while. I wonder about living next door to those people, though. I wonder about living next door to them. How about this? Listener says, I've gained a new understanding of all of the holes in our social safety net that should protect our most vulnerable. The selfishness of people to put themselves before the community, the rampant willingness to ignore science to justify individual actions was quite eye-opening. Another says, I'm finding myself in my place in the world in a way that I didn't or couldn't before. Wow. Another says, it's been an awakening, reminding me how lucky I am to live in Canada, how appreciative I am of my relatively cushy lifestyle. How about this? Listener says, the biggest or the most dramatic way the year's changed me, seeing that healthcare and governments can quickly and easily respond to an epidemic, and that their lack of response to the drug poisoning death crisis, in other words, the opioid epidemic, is based on discrimination or the government's interest in keeping people who use, or you might say disinterest in keeping people who use drugs alive. There are parallel pandemics.
Yes. And
epidemics, let me say.
Well, yes. And I think, an epidemic affects a small population. A pandemic affects everybody. I would actually argue opioids is a pandemic.
Sure.
It affects everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe even if you're not in it. But I also agree. It's like the bar has been raised for government responding to like meaningful crisis. Like we know what they can do if they see something as a big enough emergency. So I absolutely believe in that idea as well.
How about this? This is a real life comment. This is real talk from Tracy on our live chat. Tracy's watching right now. It says, keeping my mom safe while also trying to celebrate what little time she has left has literally taken years from my own life. That from Tracy. That's just much love to you, Tracy, and your family. We've got some positive reflections coming up in just a moment, but it's a different positive reflection today. I decided to take it in a different direction. I got an email and from Westside Matt. It's coming up in a second, and you might say that's not like a photo of the Aurora Borealis, or that's not a puppy video. That's what this is supposed to be, to get the week started off on the right foot. But I love it, the raw honesty from Westside Matt, and it's a positive reflection. He took the last week to reflect. So we're going to go in a bit of a different direction coming up in just a second. Let me remind you that the team at Westworld Computers has been meeting their customers in the middle, has been finding you and working with you wherever your finances are at to be able to bolster your tech offerings. So whether it's a big iMac desk unit you need, an iPad for the kids, maybe it's a new Apple Watch, or maybe something gently used like an iPhone. You don't need the newest one. You just need one that doesn't have the screen cracked in 11 places, that can actually run the new apps that all the kids are talking about. Daryl and the team at Westworld have the new lineup from Apple and the gently used, software reloaded, warranty reapplied, and they can work with you across the budgetary spectrum. At Westworld Computers, proudly family-owned for more than 4 decades. The team at Alta Moving and Storage know that this is the time of year that you may be considering making that move. It's not minus 25 anymore. And there are all the reasons in the world to capitalize on opportunity. So if that's a move for you, take the stress out of it. Move with these pod-style containers that they have. That's what they're known for. It allows you to move at your own pace. It takes all the all the sort of like time crunch out of it. We all know what we're talking about there. Plus, long and short-term storage solutions. You've got that upright piano you're not quite ready to give up on yet, but it just doesn't fit the space. They can help you find a way to store that at Alta Moving and Storage. And then there's the team at Kuby Energy. These guys are Tesla certified. They do all their installations in BC and Alberta with certified electricians or electrical apprentices. You know the job's going to be done right. They do commercial, residential, big into industrial, and they do all the paperwork too. To take the guesswork, you make sure you're not missing out on any sort of bursary or rebate. Kuby Energy's got you covered there. You can find everything they do at kubyenergy.ca. Each and every Monday, the team at Kuby Energy also presents a little something we call Positive Reflections. So on the average week, Positive Reflections will be puppy, videos or photos of flowers or stories of people paying it forward. But we got this email from West Side Matt on the Friday of our week off. He took the week to reflect himself. And while this is maybe not inherently positive, it's moving in a good direction. And I think that a lot of you might be on the same page as Matt. I know to a certain degree I am. I thought it was a perfect fit for this segment. He says, we're so glad to have had the opportunity to enjoy a week away from the show to recharge. In a week with no real talk, I was left to conventional media, and I did some self-reflecting. He says, I came to the realization that I'm tired, and I have a sense of apathy over current events and states of affairs. Honestly, I'm tired of COVID talk. It's taken over our lives. I'm not dismissing it. It's very much real and has real consequences. People have died and lives have been changed. But I'm tired of hearing about it every day. The vaccine or people complaining about restrictions or the lack of restrictions. Enough! Just let me know when I can book my shot and when I can have people back inside my home, says Matt. That's all I care about. I'm sick and tired of politics. Federal, provincial. As a small C conservative, I don't have faith that Erin O'Toole has the ability to rein in extremists. Climate change is real. I also feel that Justin Trudeau only has the Laurentian Valley in mind with his policies. With the exception of TMX, I don't feel like Alberta's benefited from this government. And what's going on with Jason Kenney? The old Wild Rosers are controlling this party and pulling the strings, and all of his policies are for show and pandering to the grassroots base. It's not what's good for us or our image. Alberta's reputation's been negatively affected. To be honest, I was excited about the War Room when it was announced, but it's embarrassing us. I thought it was going to promote the benefits of ethical oil and gas, not attack cartoons. I supported our fight against the carbon tax. I believe it's provincial jurisdiction. I believe Ottawa has its hand in our pockets, but times are changing, and maybe Rachel Notley had it right the first time. But like the strong social conservatives within the UCP, the NDP has its own grassroots that scare me too, so I can't vote for them. I'm sick and tired of working from home. I want to see my coworkers. I'm sick and tired of the never-ending news cycle. I'm sick and tired, but nobody seems to care about the federal government's scandals, but they're going to win the next election. I'm sick and tired of Alberta's policies. Alberta needs promotion, not bashing. Let's take the dramatization out of the news. Let's take the us versus them mentality out of politics. Let's get real, says Westside Matt. He says, I needed to express my feelings with others who may feel the same, and I have found a home with the Real Talk community. So thank you for the platform. Not from West Side Matt. And as far as I'm concerned, Real Talk, introspection, reflection is all positive in these books. Positive Reflections brought to you by Kuby Energy. We're back at it tomorrow live at 8:30 Mountain Time. Tell your friends, share the podcast, and we'll see you soon.